Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وقال الملك إني أرى 7 بقرات سمان يأكلهن 7 عجاف و7 سنبلات خضر وأخر يابسات يا أيها الملأ أفتوني في رؤياي إن كنتم للرؤيا تعبرون. قالوا أضغاث أحلام وما نحن بتأويل الأحلام بعالمين. وقال الذي نجا منهما وادكر بعد أمة أنا أنبئكم بتأويله فأرسلون. يوسف أيها الصديق أفتنا في 7 بقرات سمان يأكلهن 7 عجاف و7 سنبلات خضر وأخر يابسات لعلي أرجع إلى الناس لعلهم يعلمون. قال تزرعون 7 سنين دأبا فما حصدتم فذروه في سنبله إلا قليلا مما تأكلون. ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك 7 شداد يأكلن ما قدمتم لهن إلا قليلا ما قدمتم لهن إلا قليلا مما تحصنون. ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك عام فيه يغاث الناس وفيه يعصرون. لقد كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب ما كان حديثا يفترى ولكن تصديق الذي بين يديه وتفصيل كل شيء وهدى ورحمة لقوم يؤمنون صدق الله العظيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahilladzi 'allama bil qalam, 'allamal insana ma lam ya'lam. Wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil mursalin Muhammadinil amin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'du. We send our prayers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May He protect us from this pandemic and strengthen us in this uncertain time. My name is Hadzamin Fadli Rabbi. I'm a director at the Embun Kalimasada Cultural Center, Waqf Board of Islamic University of Indonesia, as well as an assistant professor at the Department of International Relations, Islamic University of Indonesia, Yogyakarta. And I will be your host today. I would like to say, welcome to the first Sarasehan webinar, Islam and the Pandemic 2021. This Sarasehan is made possible by the collaboration between International Relations Department and Embun Kalimasada Cultural Center at the Waqf Board of Islamic University of Indonesia. You might be questioning the speakers what Sarasehan is, especially if you are not coming from Indonesia or Malay region. This particular word would be sound foreign to you. Let me explain that a bit. Sarasehan in Indonesian culture is a special meeting designated to hear insights and opinions about certain issues in a certain field from the expertise. It is actually what we are going to do today. Our topic for today is social, economical, and political challenges and opportunities in COVID-19. The second session of Sarasehan will discuss the impact of COVID-19 pandemic towards surviving Islamic Socio-Political Economy and its future. In this pandemic, Muslim countries are affected politically and economically by the pandemic, along with Islamic economic system and also its financial system. This session will also discuss about what is the post-pandemic opportunities for Muslim countries and societies in the matters of social politics and economy. The committee has collected several questions session. And for that, with me today, we have four speakers coming from different corners of the globe. The first one is Dr. Hiba Rauf Izzat. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Hiba.
Waalaikumsalam.
How are you doing, Dr. Hiba?
Alhamdulillah, all is fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope that the winter in Istanbul is not too harsh for you, Dr. Hiba. The second speaker is also, yes, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Hiba. We also have Dr. Daniel Muhammad Yusuf, which is also the Deputy Dean in the Academic and Research at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, IIUM, Malaysia. Assalamualaikum, Dr. Daniel.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daniel, for coming. And also we have Mr. Priyonggo Suseno, MSc. He is the lecturer at the Department of Economics, Faculty of Business and Economics, Islamic University of Indonesia, Yogyakarta. Assalamualaikum, Mr. Priyonggo.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for inviting me to join this discussion.
All right, thank you very much for your attendance, dear speakers. And now without further ado, we will start the discussion by hearing from our speakers today, and we will continue into the discussion session. To talk about the issue, first I would like to invite Dr. Hiba Rauf Izzat, which is who is the assistant professor of politics and civilizational studies at the Ibn Khaldun University, Istanbul, Turkey. She is also known for her activism in the field of democratization in Middle East, and she has worked upon many manuscripts as well as the working papers in different institutions. Without further ado, Dr. Hiba, I would like to welcome you to speak for about 12 to 15 minutes, and the virtual floor is yours, Dr. Hiba.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be amongst these distinguished scholars and to be hosted by an Indonesian university. So I welcome everyone. Actually, when I was invited, I started thinking again about what we experienced for the past year. And redefining the political is very important because this is a struggle. I'm a political theorist by training, and we always deal with concepts. So we keep revising our concepts and the meanings and this the semantic field. So I think that the last year was a very important opportunity to reflect upon that. And I will start by Dr. Ziauddin Sardar's understanding of our post-normal times. You know, we have this notion of new normal, and while the post-normal times is a very interesting and well-constructed concept referring to complexity, ambiguity, because of technology, because of the speed of changes that we are witnessing in our age, the notion of new normal is constructed actually to prepare us for something that we still don't know. So the new normal is supposed to force you to accept whatever procedures are going to be taken and considering this to be the new situation, and you can't resist. While in the post-normal, you are trying to struggle and you feel more the agency of people in trying to frame and to have an influence on the post-normal times. But the new normal is usually more corporate. The post-normal is the new normal after the pandemic is more constructed by the states, by sovereignty, to introduce measures that you should accept because this is the new normal. The post-normal is ours. It's the humanity in a new age with all these changes and inventions, and there is more agency in it. So I wanted just to clarify at the beginning that there is so much political influence of how we understand time and the way we have the ability to deal with it as citizens and as human beings as well. The political should be, if we talk about political changes and how the pandemic changed the political sphere, should be taken in a more wider sense, because the political is very much mixed with the sociological. And my perspective will take the sociological not only from the nation state, but also to the global level as well, because this pandemic brought an experience of being locked down, of the lockdown in so many societies that we are sharing now across cultures, across ethnicities, across ideologies, across all these cleavages that we are witnessing between people in the same society and internationally widely. We are witnessing a common experience of time and space, that we are locked in our homes, that we are having this long time during the day, the interaction within the families and the dynamics of interaction with the others on the internet, the way we used to teach in the university for the past year, online, not having direct communication with our students, etc. It affects very much the culture of engagement and the sociology of our times. So the political is not only the power issue, but also the political is the public dimension, the public policies, the public spaces. In the dynamic, the public space also supposed to be controlled for the benefit of the health situation in each country and worldwide as well, regarding travels, etc. But at the same time, we witnessed during that year very strong movements like Black Lives Matter, like what happened in the United States again during the past 2 months regarding trying to sort of exercise more pressure regarding the outcome of the presidential elections. So people were on the street. When it comes to decisive moments, the public basically tries to have an influence, and people were on the streets for good or for bad, sometimes celebrating a specific carnival or something, and sometimes for exercising political pressure. So the sovereignty of the state could not curb people from expressing themselves and accessing the streets. Sometimes even for socialization, many people violated the lockdown regulations, and there was at the beginning very harsh reaction by the security and by the apparatus of the state, and then it became milder, trying to convince people to be more mindful. And it started to become a habit then regarding wearing masks, keeping the social distance, etc. So this is also very political. What we witness in everyday life is political, and this should be taken into consideration. But also the global and the territorial regarding the sovereignty of the state and the borders and the global level, we witness a lot of initiatives to exchange between the different corners of the global civil society experiences, to exchange knowledge. The fact that at the very beginning of the pandemic, the ventilator, one of the companies producing ventilators, made the technology accessible online to other people to have access to that locally, and then maybe manufacture ventilators. So you witness the exercise of power and sovereignty, but you also witness the exercise of solidarity. And actually, there are so many dimensions that I wanted to mention related to the letter S. So I was just writing down my points, and then the letter S popped up in many of my ideas. So I start by the spatial, sovereign, and securitization dimension. Of course, during the pandemic, the state managed to basically control in many countries the space and exercise sovereignty at its best, as we call it in political science, the state of exception. So during the state of exception, when there is an emergency such as the pandemic, the state takes over the power, and then it can actually change laws, enforce new regulations on people. This is a state of exception, and it takes everything in its hand. But on the other hand, there was the space of social media, because people were sitting at home, and of course, even economically, we say that so many sectors were affected in the economy, but there was booming in some companies like Netflix, for example, and such companies that facilitated that people would access knowledge or access entertainment, whatever. So the social media played a very important role in spreading news, in scrutinizing the statistics that were published by the different governments, etc. So the spatial dimension of controlling the physical space, but at the same time not being able to basically fully control the social media, communicate and to know more about others. And for the first time, I claim that people were going to the WHO websites, average citizens everywhere, to see the statistics and to verify, and every country was forced to announce every day, like on the TV, the figures, etc., with a lot of also, again, scrutinization by civil society actors, by average citizens, that the numbers were not very accurate, etc., because people showed concern and they had time. And the dimension of time is very important in understanding politics when it comes to, the virtual time, the collective time. There are so many theories about the division of time, and of course, the overarching time of politics and planning, etc. The second dimension after the spatial and the sovereign and the securitization and the parallel social media is the dimension of solidarity. And again, when it comes to time, we have the rational time where you have plans, short-term, medium-term, and long-term, but you also have this spontaneous dimension. And this is very important to remember when we are offering a critical perspective of modernity, that modernity focuses more on the rational, on reason, and on control of behavior, and on a differentiation of functions. So average citizens cannot deal with the pandemic. They have to listen to the government to tell us what to do and how to act. But when it comes to showing solidarity with people during such times of crisis, the spontaneous, instantaneous is very important to examine by social scientists, actually, and how people reacted to the public vacuums in offering public services, specifically in the medical sector. Because hit by the pandemic, many countries could not offer public services and access to services, medical services, I mean, to everyone. And there was a crisis even in the Western countries. There was a shortage in offering the ventilators, or even moral and ethical issues were raised regarding who gets the priority, the old people or the young people. We had some ethical dilemmas here. So minding the notion of time and the different speeds and the way time is related to reactions and people's engagement and the sovereign control, the notion of time is very important. And I think that a lot of spontaneous actions came up. So people started, and civil society started offering and filling the gaps. And even when it comes to people being locked down with the pandemic, affected by the pandemic, testing positive and being sick, instantly in different neighborhoods in my country. For example, I live in Istanbul, but I'm Egyptian. So in Egypt, instantaneously, many civil society platforms started offering delivery of food to people in their neighborhoods and in their homes, making lists of people who volunteer to basically deliver. Average citizens saying, I can deliver to old people who cannot go out and during the lockdown times, and they need something. And instantly these networks started emerging. It is political because it also takes the power back to the society during a time when the state is taking the power in its own hand in states of exception and times of exception. So I think that this is also very important to watch the speed of civil society and the speed of spontaneous actions and the overarching control of time by states and by sovereign powers. The third S is the secular spiritual, the secular religious. So we had this, and the scientific. So the secular, spiritual, scientific, this triology was very politicized as well. So you even watched some of the presidents addressing the nation, but putting in front of them the minister of health. So the president is standing behind the minister of health, like, these are the experts, these are the ones who have more to say. And it actually rearranged the prioritization of action. And in the case of Egypt, again, if I want to give examples, less appearance of the president in the media, and more appearance of the minister of health and the prime minister. So there was that sense of that the civil, not only the military and the policing, etc., the civil dimension of the government is taking over, because it's a matter of rule of experts. So these are the experts, and we will listen to them. What would the scientists say? And this raised a lot of controversy as well when it came to the spiritual, because the scientists say something, but the spiritual fatwas are trying to sometimes support and sometimes being very careful regarding what to say to people in the name of faith, in the name of religion, not only in the world of Islam, but everywhere. There was this time of ambiguity. Should we support the state as religious institutions, or be a bit careful and look at the situation? And of course, the lockdown entailed also the closing of some places of worship, because people could not deal still. There was no tradition of keeping the social distance, etc. So the fatwa dimension that you mentioned in the invitation to talk with the colleagues here is a very important dimension. How different fatwas basically responded to the challenge, enabled people to be comforted by the religious opinion, not feeling confused or anything. So the scientific and the spiritual, but also the scientific, proved to be not as strong as people expected. They expected, because of the secular culture, that the word of science is a word of truth. But during the pandemic, over a year, we got so many contradicting signals from the medical sector. You have to wear gloves. No, gloves are not important. It's enough to clean your hands. And it's not about the details. It's about how this affects people's and massive understanding of our relation to scientists and the ability to basically manage very tough times. So the secular, scientific, spiritual will have long-term impacts. And this is a debate that has been going on in the Arab world, at least for over 200 years, the secularization process and its relation to politics and to identity. The dimension also that is very important is the dimension of survival. Bringing death to the public consciousness and to the personal domain affected very much our cultures and created this sense of solidarity across the globe that actually will have later impacts as well. Some nations lost in the pandemic more people than they lost in wars. So, and still during the pandemic, some basic essential conflict zones in our region and in our world continued. I mean, the pandemic did not stop wars, unfortunately, which is amazing. It shows us something about human nature and how its capability of being so evil, that during the pandemic, there were even new wars. And we remember at the beginning of the pandemic, that even the European countries, there was a very important or very well-known case that there was, I think, the ventilators going from one country to the other, and they were hijacked by another country, and then there was a fight between some countries. I mean, so you had little wars that showed savagery basically in civilized amongst civilized, so-called civilized nations, and at the same time you had this ability to show solidarity, etc. The notion of term impact, some because of the pandemic procedures, they have to be buried in a specific way, and no one was allowed. There were no funerals basically allowed because of the pandemic, and this shook the social texture a lot, and it affected us all very much. This will have an impact on people's understanding of sacrifice, people's understanding of solidarity, the notion of death, that death is so close to us, to the extent that they might in the future consider that the political activism, no matter how risky it might be, that at the end of the day, we are so close to death, and it all might end. And hence, better die while you are struggling for something that is worthwhile. So it's a very complex
Excuse
map.
me,
When
your time have already been finished.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
bringing it to a close.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say it's a very complex
All
map,
right.
and
Yes,
redefining
please.
the notions that we are dealing with in political thinking is very crucial. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my reflections with you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hiba, for your remarks. I can see that I have several points that I've noted from your speech. On your speech, you have said that there are so many political and social challenges during the pandemics. You specifically focus on how state and society is building the relation with each other. And you have seen that the actors is trying to, many actors is trying to seek influence in ensuring the global order and global security. Therefore, state is not the only actor who try to define the security. You are also talking about the discussion about the pandemic is more complicated in the field of global politics, because many actors are also trying to cope with the pandemic, with all of the inevitable crises happening, and especially state who is facing the ultimate crisis here, and state is trying to strengthen their authority and sovereignty during the crisis. Facing with that kind of challenges, we can see that several civil societies in many countries, not only Muslim countries, but also in countries like India, in countries in Latin America, they are trying to resist against the extra control which is imposed by the government. They are trying to impose excess control to the society so that society would like to resist. And one of the ways to resist the oppression of the state is through solidarity between the global actors and also civil societies around the world. And it's very important to take the power back to society. You also mentioned about the importance of taking continuous action by the global civil society, as well as building policies based on evidence-based policy, which is sometimes is challenged in Muslim societies, especially in countries which the ulama has the bigger role to formulate the policy. Thank you very much, Dr. Hiba, for your wonderful and important speech. And now I would like to welcome Priyonggo Suseno, Mr. Priyonggo Suseno, MSc. Is one of the lecturers at the Department of Economics at the Islamic University of Indonesia. He is currently completing his doctoral degree in Islamic finance at INCHAIF, the Global University of Islamic Finance, Malaysia. He was the head of the undergraduate program on Islamic Economic Studies program from 2003 to 2006. He also has several activities in several professional organizations concerning Islamic economic and also Islamic economy society in both in local region and also in national level. Without further ado, I would like to give the virtual floor to Mr. Priyonggo. You have 15 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me a chance to share for the discussion. Before I start my speech, please just let me remind me if I spend 2 months time for this session. First of all, I want to say that the impact of COVID-19 is multidimensional, and everybody knows that we need a comprehensive discussion to find the ideal solution. Secondly, I want to say that understanding the economic impact is the easiest way for everyone to know. That's why, because some of economic indicators are about numbers, so we can feel directly. We don't have enough money, we don't have enough jobs. It's easy to understand, right? And the third one is that the economic analysis framework basically have a certain framework. I want to emphasize is that economic analysis are mostly based on a comparative methods. For example, if we face an economic recession, we understand that most people go to the worst condition, don't have enough money, the lower ability to pay, and so on. But we have to remember that there are some group of people that become happier because of the recession. So in this session, I would to invite all of you to have a look what happened to the economies in Islamic countries versus OIC member countries, and we can compare what compared to the rest of the world, and we can find what will happen in the future, especially 2 or 4 years later after the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me share some of my views. Mr. Chairman, maybe you can make me the co-host, so I can share the slide.
Hello, Mr. Priyonggo. Is there a problem?
Yes, it's just starting.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen perfectly, sir. Please proceed.
First, I want to say that economic framework on analyzing economic impact of the COVID-19 could be different compared to what we have discussed by Dr. Heba. Yeah. We concern about number, we concern about most observable data. So we can have a look that COVID-19 have not only the short-term effect to the economy. They can affect the economic activity gradually and step by step, and one variable could affect other variables. Let's say, starting in March 2020, we have a problem of lowering the demand for the certain sector, such as for the transportation, or maybe another one is such as tourism. Yeah? So one of the first impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is we could lower the demand. especially for the export, for the import. When we conducting trade among countries, because we get the problem about logistic or transportation around countries, especially if between countries have long distance or high cost of transportation. The second part, that COVID-19 also impact the supply chain. It could disrupt the supply chain for the whole economy, because COVID-19 could not only hit the demand, but also hurt the workers, the employer of all companies. So in the next turn, it could affect make the economic downturn. And mainly, we can have look step by step. For the first step, we can have look at the economic impact of COVID-19 can be seen of the lowering balance of payment, lowering of the trade volume internally, domestically, or across the country. And the next step, we can have look that in almost in any country, we experience the higher unemployment rate, because several sectors cannot sustain during the COVID-19. And the next step, we can have look that we have the higher poverty level, even in IC country or non-IC country. And the next, maybe after we blend the economic impact, social impact, and political impact, at the end of the day, we have the lower quality of our life. Such as we have the lower intention to have one to each other. We have the last destruction society. So if we have look one by one, the first, we can have look the impact of the COVID-19 to the economic growth. We can see that not each country in the world could escape from the impact of COVID-19. At the global
sorry,
level,
we are losing your slide. Would you please try to reconnect it again?
Thank you.
Can we see your slide once more?
Yes.
We have lose you. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Again?
Yes. Oh, we are losing it again. Sorry.
Again? Wait a minute. Okay, you got my slide?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Yes.
For the first, we can have a look the impact of the COVID-19 to the economic growth, globally or regionally, or each country in OIC members country. At the global level, we can have a look starting in the end of 2019 until today, the beginning of the 21, that economic experience the downturn. We experience globally negative economic growth around 4.4%. If we compare between developing countries and developed countries, developing countries are experience better than developed countries, because we know that most of the developed countries have more export level and import level interconnection to other countries compared to the developing economies. If we have look in the case of OIC member countries, on average, if we compare, the economic growth of OIC countries is lower than what? If we compare minus 4.7 compared to the minus 4.4%. But they have looked internally within the OIC countries, we experience few countries have the positive economic growth, such as Brunei Darussalam, the other one is in Guyana, and some in African countries. So we can learn in this part why we experience some countries has experienced the higher growth or positive growth, such as Bangladesh, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. But however, a few countries have the huge economic downturn. Libya, Lebanon, Maldives, Suriname, and some countries. On average, of course, we have a negative impact. What the next would happen? The next would happen is in terms of international trade. Even though, on average, the international trade among OIC countries is quite low compared to OIC to non-OIC, but we can have a look at the volume of export from OIC countries to the world start to decline in the end of 1918. However, if we compare internally, the intra-export between OIC members countries is still growing. However, because of the pandemic economic, we have experienced the lowering the export internally or export externally. This means that the trade volume domestically, regionally, and internationally slowed down. In terms of direct investment, this means that the possibility of one country to invest capital outside, the foreign direct investment, this means that money invested in the local, in the domestic countries, also start decline at the end of 2018. Why this happened? Again, because most of the country focus to control the domestic economic activity, and they don't really have any briefness to invest to the outside because the uncertain condition. Because we don't really know, starting for maybe the last year, about let's say when the COVID pandemic would finish, when we will find the vaccine and another solution. The next impact is unemployment. If we compare the starting in 2020 and 17, the employment level around on all member countries, which is around 56 OIC countries, still increasing, around 45 million unemployment for the all OIC countries, and start decline in 2020 and 18. We have a look on the table. However, after COVID-19, 2019 and 2020, the employment rate start growing, which means because of a lot of company closed, so there are a lot of people losing the job. On the other hand, there is no job creation around the OIC countries. However, as I said at the beginning, that even though most of the economic sector hit by COVID-19, but some economic activities still can survive, such as food and beverage, such as textile and garment. We can have a look in that case, the supply chain job in total of employment in OIC countries mostly came from food and beverage and manufacturing. And we have looked that most of the supply chain have the lower experience on creating a job or creating employment. If we have a look at the sectoral aspect, we understand that COVID-19 mostly hit that any sector that need people to move, such as transportation, such as tourism, hotel, and accommodation. So it's not only happen in OIC countries, but also open throughout the world. So we can have a look based on the IDB analysis. If there is no COVID-19 or baseline, it could be the international tourism could still decline. However, because of COVID-19, we can have a look on the scenario 2 or scenario 1. Scenario 2 is mean of the pessimistic condition. We expect that all tourism activities could lower so much. A lot of flights have been cancelled. A lot of occasions have been cancelled because of COVID pandemic. In terms of sectoral, I have some information about Indonesia for the case. Yeah. That most of the sector, as I say, are hit by COVID-19, but few of them could survive. What happened in Indonesia could be similar to the rest of developing countries in OIC members. Some survival sectors, such as health and education, so we are quite happy in that case as a university, Islamic University of Indonesia, right now we still have the stable number of students enrolled to our university. The health services are also growing. Another one is renewable energy, housing and appliance financing, and food and beverage. So if we make a conclusion of the sector that can survive during the pandemic, most of them are necessities goods, not luxury goods. So if we want to develop the luxury good product such as tourism, it hit a lot by the COVID-19. We have, as a conclusion, before we can understand when the COVID-19 would finish, we have looked at almost all countries have all made policies to combat this COVID-19. In economic analysis, we divided to be three types of policy, which is fiscal policy, monetary policy, and balance of payment or exchange rate policy. We can see that almost all countries on IC country has spent $1 billion for each countries for the spending to come up with COVID-19, either in terms of providing health services or make a preventive policy to avoid the spreading up of the COVID-19 impact. I think I lose. When we try to analyze why some countries in OIC have positive economic growth, such as Brunei Darussalam, such as Guyana, Azerbaijan, and a few countries, and most of them experience negative economic growth. We try to make a relationship between the number of COVID-19 cases per 1 million population for each country to the economic growth starting 2019, 2020. And we find that there is negative relationship between economic growth and the number of COVID-19 cases, which means that the more COVID-19 cases happen in one country, therefore, the more economic construction would happen to that country. The economic growth have impacted negatively by COVID-19. So based on this data, we can see that some challenges that have to be understood by all policymakers, especially economic policymakers. The first, we experience that most countries have negative growth. Only few OIC countries experience economic growth, such as Bangladesh and Benin. And the IMF, however, predicting that global economic growth in 2020 and 21 still low, but already recovered. This year, it could be the next year, would be still a difficult year for the job seekers, because the number of new job opportunities almost in each country in OIC is still low. And the third one, that the travel industry have been badly damaged anywhere, with island cutting flight, customer canceling business trip, and holidays. And the fourth, that hospitality sector also being hit hard by COVID-19, with millions of jobs lost and many companies bankrupt. However, there are some new shopping style everywhere, even in OIC member countries, which is at-home shopping style is growing. The retail footprint has markedly dropped as the buyer have remained at home. In the case of Indonesia, let's say, online shopping become more popular right now.
Mr. Priyonggo, I'm sorry, sir. Your time is up.
Yes.
Your time is up, sir. So please wrap up it to the conclusion session. Thank you.
That's one slide, yeah. And secondly, is pharmaceutical companies are among the gainers of all, because the government right now have gave a lot of fiscal policies to build like hard society. Therefore, we, according to economic crisis, we gave some policy recommendation. The first is that every country should be focused on the policy to stop the spread of COVID-19 within the country. Why? Because this is the requirement for normalization of the economic activity. Secondly, it is necessary to prioritize the domestic market, especially for the sector that are not sensitive to COVID-19, such as necessity goods, food, beverage, and so on. However, for the country with low domestic market,
Mr. Priyonggo, have you finished with your explanation? Mr. Priyonggo, could you hear me? Have you finished with your explanation? Okay, I think we have lost Mr. Priyonggo. And as a chairman, I decided to postpone the Mr. Priyonggo session until next time. Thank you very much, Dr. Priyonggo, for your explanation on economics and its impact in the field of during the pandemic. What can I summarize from Mr. Priyonggo's explanation is that understanding economic impact is the easiest way to understand the impact of pandemic. That is, the first one is the pandemic would affect several economic growth for the OIC. High-income countries, of course, experience better than in lower-income countries. Several issues might impact the economic growth, such as FDI, employment, and supply chains. And also, Mr. Priyo has highlighted that two of the OIC countries have successfully gone out of the crisis, that is the Bangladesh and Benin. And we should take a closer attention to the economic growth in both of those countries later, because it could provide the lessons from Muslim countries in order to cope with the changes after the COVID-19. The second one is Mr. Priyonggo also emphasized the importance of policy response. The government in most OIC countries has implemented fiscal and monetary measures such as package stimulus. Also, the implementation of such packages is different from country to another. And the last one is that Mr. Priyonggo also highlighted the importance of how pandemic has impacted negatively the economic growth. While the health sector has been hit hard due to the pandemic, pharmaceutical industries as well as industries that use online platforms is very much growing in the era of pandemic. I guess that's all from Mr. Priyonggo, and we are now moving to our third speaker, that is Associate Professor Dr. Daniel Muhammad Yusuf, who is a Deputy Director on Academic Affairs in ISTAC IUIM. Without further ado, I would like to give the virtual floor for Dr. Daniel Muhammad Yusuf. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was listening to the two previous speakers. I think I'll be addressing some of the points that they brought up in a different light, perhaps. But let me begin by saying this. The big picture, when we look at the socio-political and economic challenges and opportunities in the age of pandemic, is actually, I think, the dilemma of the trade-off between public healthcare and economic activity. Whatever decisions that we make at this level, then it cascades down to the realm of the political and social. Yeah. So economics is the base here. as far as how I view approaches to the pandemic. Dr. Hiba earlier in her speech mentioned about post-normal times. Interestingly enough, the first time I listened to this, I listened directly to Dr. Ziauddin Sarda when he came to Malaysia to talk about post-normal times in 2018. This is when Malaysia experienced its first change of federal government. By the time we spoke about the new normal because of COVID-19, in around March or February 2020, Malaysia was experiencing another change of government. So these are, I think, interesting indicators about post-normal and new normal discussions that perhaps we can have later. So as I mentioned, everything is basically cascading down to political and social effects as a result of this trade-off that we have in terms of policy and decision-making by the government between public healthcare and economic activity. So I'll be looking at, I think, mainly political, social, and even educational challenges and opportunities. I won't cover economy so much because Pak Priyo has done that quite expansively just now. So I would focus on other issues. So by way of introduction, I think the way to look at the pandemic is that in history, once COVID-19 happened, you would notice that there was an expansion of interest in the literature pertaining to disease in different civilizations, including Islam. And what you found in all of the experiences of pandemic is that it became the catalyst for advancement. Yeah, it became the catalyst for advancement in public healthcare, in medicine, and eventually in economics as well as politics as well. When COVID-19 happened, I think there was a great interest in the literature of Islam pertaining to its relationship with quarantine, operating procedures, for example. There was a lot of reference to how Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Khalif Omar, for example, managed pandemic during their lifetimes. Even during the military expedition of Khalif Omar, for example, he was asked whether he was fleeing from the decree of Allah, but actually he said that, yes, I was fleeing from the decree of Allah, but I'm moving to the other decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's a way of looking at it from I think a civilizational perspective in terms of how it had to be managed as an emergency that I think overrules other interests of the time. So this is the same case when you look at the Black Death, when you look at incidents such as the HIV or AIDS pandemic, SARS, the swine flu, avian flu, Ebola, and Zika, and now COVID-19. That this is not something which is alien to I think historical experience and civilization, and we find a lot of I think references as well as I think examples from which we can follow suit in terms of the best practices or approach. So in a nutshell, I can say that right now perhaps the viewpoint is that it's effective, it's affecting societies across nation states in a negative way. But I think in the future, in the long term, I think it will become a catalyst for great advancements in medical care, public health, and other matters as well. So now let's have a look at some of the challenges as well as opportunities in the social, political, and educational dimensions. As Pak Priyo mentioned just now, policies should focus on the quelling of the virus of COVID-19. But at the same time, we notice that it's also fluctuating as well, our understanding of the virus, our aim to implement a global vaccination program across nation states is something which is also, I think, increasingly coming into question as we learn more. I think today I was reading that they found out that the vaccines that's developed by the UK, for example, is not effective on the South African strain. So it puts into question the effectiveness or the efficacy of the current vaccines in terms of how it may help develop herd community that we intend to do so as a result of the global vaccination program. And we also found out in Singapore, I think it was yesterday or today I was reading that there was a case of reinfection from somebody who was already vaccinated as well. So there's a lot of things that we are learning in relation to this that makes, I think, policy and action in terms of managing the crisis something more fluid than we anticipated to be so. So we can say that priority should be given to COVID-19 recovery, but at the same time, we're talking about a lot of cascading impact on social and political as well as I think educational sectors that overlap, I think, in the long term, and they would um, perhaps have negative consequences in the long term. Another thing that we need to look at in terms of social challenge is the vulnerability of the poor, the urban poor, and those living conditions of migrant workers, who are, as a result, being unfairly, for example, stigmatized as a result of their situation of being in poverty or living in bad living conditions. So this is something which is problematic in a country like Malaysia, because we have a lot of migrant workers and we have a lot of illegal migrant workers because of their status. If we are to give vaccination to them, then by having vaccination, then we would know, of course, about their status of being illegal migrants. Then that would perhaps put them at risk of being deported and so on. So this again comes into conflict perhaps between national interests and security, as well as humanitarian concerns, and even, I think, employment and economic viability of workers. So it puts that into, I think, a very complex pot for decision makers to make decisions upon. Another angle which is, I think, not sufficiently addressed in terms of perhaps psychosocial challenge is that of mental health. There has been an increase, for example, in domestic violence, across the board, across countries. I think increase in depression, which requires for governments to, I think, have a development of a psychosocial support system in line, as well as, I think, concerns for the mental health of youth undertaking important exams in their secondary schools or even in universities, because of I think how the issue of learning overlaps with their own, I think, psychological self, and how perhaps coming from certain backgrounds means that they will not have access to online education as compared to others. So this is something that is a spillover into the I think social challenge as well. There may be challenges, but there can be opportunities as well. We find that I think across the year and a half or so, the role of masjid, the role of mosque, for example, have been depleted because people were not able to go, and the function of mosque committees have been limited as a result. But I have not seen any kind of proactive dynamism from mosque committees, for example, in Malaysia, to instead of performing traditional roles to facilitate spirituality and so on, why can't they go out to do more activism to help out with the management of the community and so on and so forth? So there's opportunity there for us to, I think, expand the typical way of us in looking at religious or certain functions of religious institutions. As I mentioned as well, there can be better investment by the government in terms of psychosocial support system for mental health. There can also be, I think, improvements in living conditions of migrant workers as a basic human right, as well as I think in a positive way that there are transitions as well. If we look at how we're doing this seminar itself, I think prior to COVID-19, this wouldn't have, I think, normally happen. But this year alone, and this is just February, I'm already speaking in 2 seminars organized by Indonesian counterparts. So that says a lot about how certain, I think, practices are changing, and some of it can be changing for the better. Perhaps not in terms of networking, but definitely in terms of, I think, the sharing and dissemination of knowledge and so on and so forth. And then when we look at political and security challenges, there's more, I think, cascading down from this, I think, dilemma of balancing public health and economic development. In terms of public healthcare, for example, as a political issue, we see that hospitals are being strained of their capacity. So myself, for example, in Malaysia, because now we are averaging about 3,000 or 4,000 a day in terms of cases, that we're asking for those with light symptoms to self-quarantine at home. But of course, this is not just simply about COVID-19, but also about the normal resumption of services, medical services to the public in general. So when the hospitals are overloaded, that means that hospitals are not able to perform their typical, I think, tasks of serving healthcare, especially to the poor, those who cannot afford private healthcare as an alternative. So this, I think, trade-off is something we can see in terms of how the government is enforcing the policy as well. Our first lockdown, which we call MCO or Movement Control Order, now we are in Movement Control Order 2.0. Last year in March was Movement Control 1.0, which was almost complete lockdown. But Movement Control 2.0 was really trying to balance with economic activity. And because of that, it's not as effective in managing the dissemination of the virus. And this is, of course, coming from that trade-off, as I mentioned earlier, because we are trying to ensure that people are not losing their jobs. Malaysia is losing, I think, 600 million US dollars a day as a result of the MCO 2.0. So this is an issue which cannot be overlooked as well. And of course, not just public healthcare strain and that balance between public healthcare and economic, but we also need to be concerned about the porousness of borders for, I think, maritime nations. So when we talk about Malaysia and Indonesia, for example, we're talking about countries that are basically made up of islands. And for Malaysia, for example, there is a porous border between Sabah and Mindanao in the Philippines. And this can be problematic in terms of managing security, in terms of healthcare, because we can't really monitor those coming in and out from across the borders between these two countries. So that can be a long-term issue. It's been an issue without COVID-19. So I don't think COVID-19 would be of any benefit to the increase of security in that context as well. And then we also have the issue of violent extremism, of terrorism as well, which is not really subsiding. I was reading in an article today that the attacks by Daesh or ISIS in eastern Syria numbered about 100 attacks for the last month. And how COVID-19 is developing in the imagination of extremists itself is something which is interesting, because you can see that there are discussions which is traceable, I think, on Telegram and so on, that some are thinking about weaponizing COVID-19 to infect populations and so on. There hasn't been, I think, alhamdulillah, a case of this yet, but the fact that they are thinking of weaponizing this virus is something which we can be concerned of as well. Also, I think we need to have a concern about the term. It's a new term which is called conspiritualists. Yeah, this is a combination of those who believe in conspiracy theory, those who believe in certain interpretations of eschatology, as well as those who are anti-vaccination. So you have this significant, I think, ignorance, which has to be addressed by the government long-term through education. But at the same time, it may be, I think, a challenge in terms of the vaccination program of the country as well. I think there's a message. Okay. How many minutes do I have, Chairman?
You still have 1 minute, sir, effective. If you would like to come to the conclusion, please.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, I'll be going to the conclusion now. But in terms of extremism and terrorism, as far as Malaysia is concerned, I think it's contributed positively. Our chief of security in terms of counter-terrorism was saying that we have managed to flatten the curve of terrorism. as a result of COVID-19. But at the same time, having said this, because of how people are quarantined at home and are having much more access in terms of screen time with online materials and so on, there have been an increase in the cases of, I think, self-radicalization. And we can see this in a number of cases, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in Southeast Asia as well. I think there was a case in Singapore that was highlighted about a few weeks ago about a person who was basically a Catholic who was radicalized in far-right extremism agenda just because he was spending 3 or 4 months under, I think, quarantine regulations. So this is something to be concerned of as well. How can government monitor the activities of its citizens online because they can easily be self-radicalized. This is as far as security is concerned. So I have, I think, another issue which is on education, but I leave that for maybe discussion. Just as a concluding statement, education is something that we need to look at as well. Why? Because what COVID-19 has contributed is to the acceleration of the digital divide. Yeah. So we find that a lot of people are growing in terms of the chasm between the rich and the poor because of their accessibility to the internet. So this is something that can have long-term repercussions in terms of, I think, the future productivity of the future use of different countries in the Muslim world. Thank you so much for the invitation. Chairman, I return it back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel Yusuf, for your remarks. You have discussed many issues. You begin with the pandemic has become the catalyst of investment in public healthcare. This is obviously clear. We can see this in many examples of Muslim countries and non-Muslim countries as well. Countries which has developed their healthcare infrastructure would be more successful in dealing with the pandemic. And the second one is also the existence of political and economic challenges. Of course, many countries are facing the dilemma between health and economy, noticing that healthcare is collapsing everywhere. In Indonesia, we are looking at the increase of cases due to the lack of beds in ICUs in Java Island as well as many other islands. Therefore, Dr. Daniel has suggested to formulate an effective solution that is specifically talking about which vaccine should be used effectively in order to stop the pandemic. The second one is, of course, also there are many social challenges and opportunities. We can see that vulnerable communities, migrant workers are, of course, living in a very bad condition. You have mentioned several examples of Malaysia and Indonesia as well. The poor are the most hit by the pandemic because of the lack of open job for the community. And the second one is also the increase of mental health issues, which occurs because of the lockdown and societal hard adaptation process to the pandemic. And the role of public facilities is also very important, especially masjid as well as traditional actors, in order to help the vulnerable. So it is not just state who are helping the vulnerable communities, but there are masjid also, and also the traditional religious communities as well. They have been proven to be effective in delivering the assistance which the government didn't successfully deliver. However, you also noted, Dr. Daniel also noted that the violence is also happening during the pandemic. Of course, we have seen some border issues in India, as well as violent extremism are very important to give focus for the policymakers as well. And also to be able to face the challenges post-pandemic, we need to strengthen education and to ensure that everyone could obtain equal access. Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel Yusuf, a very insightful remarks from you. And now we are welcoming Dr. Farhan Chak from Qatar University to give his remarks for about 12 to 15 minutes. Please, sir. Sir, we haven't heard your voice. Yes, thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. My apologies for that. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'd like to express my appreciation and gratitude to your kind invitation. In particular, I'd like to thank Zulfiqar Rahmat, who is not only a former student, but a dear friend of mine. So thank you, everybody. Now, my brief comments today are going to look at the intersection of COVID-19 and Islamophobia and the illiberal world order. And I'm going to take the case study of the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, there's a common joke amongst Kashmiris, is that we have been living with varying levels of lockdowns, curfews, and sieges for the past 73 years. And now, because of COVID-19, the world understands what it's like to be Kashmiri. But this is a joke and commonly used amongst Kashmiris, that first India locked us down and now the whole world is locked down. But I want to come to three important issues here. The COVID-19 pandemic and its effects, the growing illiberal world order, and when I think of extremism, I think of Islamophobia. I think of evangelical extremism and Zionism that perpetuates ideas and an ideology of Armageddon and World War III. Now, these are not conspiracy theorists, and that may be used to discredit any kind of analysis, but the ideology and the belief structure of who I'm referring to as extremists is quite clear, and it's in their books, it's in their texts. And this is not something that is even debated. These are very standard beliefs that not many people are familiar with. But it's important to bring it in to see how, during this particular pandemic moment, that form of Islamophobia, not only throughout the world, that is expressed through these extremist organizations, that is much more global and much more impacting and much more powerful than the low level or and admittedly absolutely incorrect levels of extremism that you have in pockets, small, I would say, minuscule pockets throughout the Middle East. So there has been an unfortunate attempt to shift the focus on where the extremism really is and to focus and singular in on these minor manifestations of it, embellish them, exaggerate them, and then refuse to even acknowledge real sources of global extremism, which I believe is Islamophobia is one of it. Now, coming towards a systematic analysis of this, let me give you a little bit of a background on Kashmir itself. So it's among the longest unresolved conflicts on the UN agenda. Actually, it was the first, even prior to Palestine. Both of them are the first and second issues on the UN agenda. Now, it's the most militarized space on the planet, with up towards 1 million Indian soldiers and paramilitaries in a vicinity, in a small vicinity. Not even worse, this situation is a nuclear flashpoint, with 3 countries surrounding a territory, all that are nuclear capable, and 2 of which have fought 4 wars already. So there is this extremely heightened sense of insecurity in this region. Now, Genocide Watch has issued 2 genocide alerts, and over the past 40 years, approximately, there have been almost 100,000 people killed, 11,000 women raped, 6,007 bodies that have been unearthed in mass graves, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, over 80,000 orphans, tens of thousands of political prisoners, including children, and this is documented by Indian human rights organizations that have said up to 13,000 children are held without charge and have all been imprisoned during the COVID lockdown. And see, that's the interesting intersection here, that COVID is being used to heighten oppression. So, and of course, just to give some people the background they may not know, this has all been heightened after August 5th, 2019 when two articles that were a part of the Indian Constitution were abrogated, basically made defunct and irrelevant, which then allowed India in their own legal system to completely appropriate the disputed territory of Kashmir. And of course, not only is this against the 21 exactly UN resolutions that talk about Kashmir and that forbid any type of demographic change, but this is also against Article 4 of the Geneva Conventions. So, but nonetheless, I wanted to give all our listeners the background of what's happening in the disputed territory of Kashmir, and now bring it to what the COVID-19 crisis has done. It has overall accelerated everything. It has heightened all troubles. So as the esteemed panelists before talked about the mental health issues, the educational issues. So the mental health crisis in Kashmir is 45% of the population suffers from some form of mental health illness. That is astronomical. There is massive unemployment. There is a deliberate disruption of the local ecosystem to increase dependency on Jammu and Kashmir on India. There have been no schools for the past 2 years. Also something that Dr. Daniel mentioned, how the COVID is affecting education. You know, even for my young children, I can see how online it's creating challenges. And if there's not a heavy intervention by parents, by peers, and we have a good circle and a good community, a support network that kind of supports the education of our children with one another. But if that's not present, and to be honest, not a lot of people have this, it is leading to less education, and this is going to pose a serious problem in the future. There is another aspect too, and this is a term that was conceptualized by Dr. Al-Altola, political somatics, which is looking at the relationship between the global illiberal order, and that's the next point I'd like to talk about, and the heightened levels of anxiety and preferential treatment when it comes to the vaccination. And even, for example, even a country that is producing it is going to selectively choose where it sends these vaccinations in a form of almost vaccine diplomacy, you can say. So what we see, and what I'm actually quite concerned about, is that the situation is accelerating so many problematic aspects of the global world order that it cannot but lead to increased violent conflict and war. So that just gives you, within the disputed territory so far, there's an extremely high infection rate, but there's a low death rate. So 2,000 people have died in the disputed territory, 300 and approximately 74 just in the capital Srinagar alone. But there is attempt by the state in its occupation of Kashmir to withhold vaccination and to limit any type of steps that could lead to a herd immunity. There's almost a deliberate attempt to try to spread the illnesses. It's extremely worrisome what is happening and what little is being done about it. And this is what I said that I'm going to come to my second point, which is the growing illiberal world order throughout the world. So many people, many academics and journalists have talked about the growing right-wing phenomenon throughout the world. And it just so happens to coincide with the pandemic. It was before, but the pandemic has heightened it. We've seen it in the attack on Capitol Hill. And I think that we have to put that in perspective just to kind of bring that in for a moment. That's 75 million people that had voted for former President Trump. That's 75 million voters that believe the election in America was stolen. This is not a small, insignificant fringe element. Now, within India too, the rise of the Hindutva fascist organization, he had the support of almost, 70%, 80% of the population and the voting population. The BJP, the fanatical fascist government that has been responsible for the destruction of houses of worship, not just mosques, but churches, and even to a lesser extent, Buddhist temples. This organization is in cahoots, has a very, let's say, deep partnership with many European countries and, well, formally with the United States of America as well, irrespective of how they are rolling back democracy, heightening levels of inequality, the rationalization of the curtailing of rights. And these are the same talking points that are very tiring and frankly quite pathetic, to rationalize all of this rollback of human rights, privacy rights, the right of, to live a life of dignity, or even education. All of this is being rolled back either under the term of terror, either under the term of, Kashmir in particular, but this is a global phenomenon, these things that are happening. I'm just isolating the discussion to how this is impacting a single area. But also the grotesque levels of marginalization. So they do this through series of emergency orders, land theft, and in particular, two things stand out. How the state then is not being held accountable due to the pandemic, it's more difficult to hold people accountable. But there are two things that I want to mention in regards to the growing illiberal order as it's manifested within the disputed territory, which is the war crimes. So India is refusing to hand back dead bodies of Kashmiris to their families for the janaza and for the last rites, and burying them in far-flung areas so nobody knows where their bodies are. And the pretext is they don't want to have large-scale gatherings for, which will then lead to expressions of anger and resistance against the Indian occupying state. And then fake encounters, which is the murder of Kashmiris. And this was actually one of the few times Indian government has admitted this, that it killed 3 Kashmiri laborers, a soldier did, for the rewards that they're given, financial and promotions within the military system by neutralizing terrorists. So all of these phenomenons that were occurring over the past, let's say, several decades have heightened and exponentially increased during the current COVID pandemic. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, the final few points I'd like to make here is the relationship here to the growing illiberal order, market fundamentalism, which I also believe is a form of extremism, capitalist exploitation of the commodification of human beings, a growing rather neoliberal order. This is heightening world conflict. And Islamophobia is one of the tools that it uses to rationalize such kind of, I believe, very grotesque and unjust initiatives. So these are the major concerns I have with COVID, the way that it's used overall, that even though, there's a very famous quote by Jean-Jacques Rousseau that man is born free, but
Dr. Farhan Chak, would you please pause your explanation now, because we are finishing.
Absolutely.
We will move.
So,
okay.
All right, I'll end there. So with one final quote, that man is born free, but everywhere is found in chains. This situation is radically getting today. Thank you.
Okay. Have you finished your explanation, Dr. Farhan?
Yes, I have. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Farhan. And now we are moving quickly to the question and answer session because we are almost filling our time limit. So the first question, we would like to deliver the first question to Dr. Heba. Dr. Heba, are you still available?
Yes, I am.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Izzat. Dr. Heba Izzat, there is one question from the audience which asks the following question. How gender activists and democratization activists in the Muslim world should pursue their goals and interests together amid some commentaries that Middle East societies have been trapped in the hands of authoritarian regime. How would you like to comment on that? I will give you 5 minutes to answer that question. Thank you.
Well, I don't think that only the Middle Eastern countries or the third world countries are trapped in authoritarian regime. I think that authoritarianism takes different shapes, and I'm very much interested in a lot of the critique of Western civilization as well, and how behind the veil of democracy in Western countries there is a degree of structural violence and degree of continuation of neocolonialism. So yes, we have authoritarian regimes and we have authoritarian cultures as well. While we want to shift our culture from being authoritarian to being authoritative, to have the legitimacy, to have the legacy, etc., but not to have the disintegration or the violence against each other or civil wars or targeting the opponents, etc. So I think it's more complicated than that. And sometimes I feel like we are accusing ourselves of being out of the context of the world. The world is very complicated, and north and south there are different authoritarianisms with different facades, with different dynamics and mechanisms, etc. How can we use the pandemic actually to promote more understanding of the need for human rights, the need for social activism, the need for engaged citizenship, the need for having a voice, but not only voices of dissent, but voices of offering alternatives. So the medical sector, for example, in all the world has been suffering first world, third world, though I don't like very much this classification. So how can we actually help each other? How can people across the globe exchange experiences? How can science serve without distinction? There will always be this problem of class divisions and social and economic cleavages. Who is getting the vaccine today? Who is having the access to the vaccine, and who can pay for it, and who can get it for free? And what countries are more prone to suffer from such division? And the efficiency of the vaccine, the German vaccine, the Chinese vaccine, and so there are issues that Muslims actually should be engaged in. And I think that liberation theology that crosses the cultures and become more compatible with our universal message as Muslims should emerge from this crisis to pick on our role globally as much as we can.
Okay. Is that all your answer, Dr. Hiba?
This is my answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Hiba. Now I will be moving to Mr. Priyongo. There's one question to you, Mr. Priyongo. How Islamic economic actors would have the chance to evaluate the existing capitalist system in the global political economic order? So the question would be, is there any possibility that Islamic economic system would create an important transformation to the global political and economic order? Sir, please. Sir, we haven't heard your voice.
Sorry, you got my voice?
All right.
Yes, sorry. Thank you. Thank you for the question. When we talk about Islamic economic system, common people, it's not economists, understand Islamic economic system is merely only Islamic finance or banking. So if you want to address the question or whether Islamic economic system could give the alternative solution for the new economic order after COVID-19, I want to emphasize that what we can get right now is not Islamic economic system itself. What we have right now is just a sub-sector of economic system. We just developed a few part of economic system based on Islamic teaching, which is such as financial sector, halal industry sector, especially food, beverage. Expect such as the sector to come up the new order after the COVID is quite far. So why? Because the share of the Islamic economic system either in OIC countries or in few countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Bahrain, and few countries with the advanced development on Islamic banking, the share of Islamic economic system is still low. So if, according to my own opinion, what we can see with Islamic economic system is the value of Islamic economic system itself that can be applied not only on banking and finance, but to the whole economies, which is based on share economies, profit sharing economies, and share economies, such as what we have right now, a little bit, is share citizenship economies, such as based on zakat, wakaf, and sodako, that we haven't explored a lot. So in that case, we can divide Islamic economic system to be two parts: commercial economic system and social economic system. Right now, we all only exploit commercial economic system itself to come up with COVID problem. So according to my opinion, we have to balance both to encourage people to develop volunteership, such as how to encourage people to have one to each other through non-market-based system, such as encouraging zakat, infak, sodako, wakaf, such as what we have in Indonesia last year. We Indonesian government have launched a wakaf-based sukuk or wakaf-based bond that could help to give the solution for the government debt. On the other hand, in terms of commercial part, we have to concern to focus, develop Islamic economic system, not only based on looking for profit, but the value itself, which is based on justice and based on collaboration, based on partnership or sharingship. If we apply the sharing economic system, inshallah, we can come up with solution when we got an economic recession because of the COVID-19. Such as right now, we can have look, there are a lot of online platform financial system based on profit sharing system, which is equity-based platform, either in the name of Islam or with this conventional name, such as we have crowdfunding system. We can apply such as a crowdfund system to give the solution with right now, because people got difficulties to get access for the low cost of fund because of the crisis. Right now, most of the banking system don't have any briefness to give credit during the economic crisis, during the COVID-19, because of the high risk. Therefore, we have to implement the alternative economic system, which is based on sharing economic system, which mainly based on mudorobah, musyarakah, not only apply in banking system, but also apply in all sectors. We experience in Indonesia such as applying sharing system in agriculture. We know and one-third profit sharing system between landowner and workers. You can also apply in food trading, such as masakan Padang or sate Madura in Indonesia. They are applied a part of economic system based on Islamic values. I think if we can start to go beyond the formality of Islamic system, Islamic economic system right now, we can get the better solution to solve when we got difficulty in economic recession. Thank you. I think it's my point. Thank you.
Mr. Priyongo. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Priyongo. We now call upon Dr. Daniel Yusuf to answer a question. Sir, is there any chance that Islamic political ideas would undergo significant reflections and transformation after the COVID-19 pandemics? That's the question, sir.
Come again? Transformation of Islamic political thought? What was it?
Yes, Islamic political ideas. Is there any chance that Islamic political ideas would undergo significant transformation after COVID-19 pandemics? Okay.
I think I like to twist this question a bit. I think it has gone through a number of unfortunate, not changes, but unfortunately appropriation by certain parties. And by here, I'm referring to, of course, to the terrorists and the extremist groups. So when was it that, the Islamic State or Islamic Caliphate, how did it become a bad word? So I think as far as I'm concerned, myself and my colleagues at ISTAC, and I think across the Muslim world, I think there has to be efforts to reappropriate this, to retake this definition, this misconceptualization from certain parties, from certain elements, in order to, I think, instill again the relevance of Islamic civilizational values in relation to the existing world order. And by existing world order, I mean nation states. So this has to be, I think, embedded in the development policy of Muslim countries. For example, Malaysia is developing its national action plan against extremism this year. So inshallah, it will be coming out by the end of this year. One of the major strategic thrusts of that national action plan would be Islamic civilization as a core component for nation building of the Malaysian identity, as well as the respect and inculcation of universal values from other faiths, because Malaysia is a multicultural country. So I think we need to do that again to make Muslim countries as an example to different populations, as well as to those who have been dissuaded from believing that all Muslim governments are authoritarian or authoritative. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Daniel Yusuf. And that wrap up our session for today. Dr. Farid Mujahid Chak, Dr. Hebar Izzat, Dr. Daniel Muhammad Yusuf, and Mr. Priyongo Seno, MSc. Thank you very much for your time and discussion. And thank you for coming to this Sarasehan session. May Allah rest protect us with health and happiness. And for everyone who is watching, please stay tuned on our YouTube channel at Department of International Relations, Islamic University of Indonesia, because next week, on 27th February 2021, we'll have a third session that will be discussing about the policy of innovations amid the pandemic in Muslim countries. I therefore thank you everyone for watching this video. Thank you to all of the speakers that has been attending this event from the beginning till the end. I'm Hadzam bin Fadirabi signing off from Universitas Islam Indonesia Yogyakarta. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.